Justice Department. The special counsel who was appointed by Attorney General Merrick Garland. So clearly, this president had feelings about this prosecution, had not chosen to intervene, but given the election and what John just mentioned, a new administration coming in, clearly the president chose to create a scenario where his son would not go to jail. Now, whether the Justice Department will continue any other aspects of investigating Hunter Biden, that's unclear. But in regard to the tax case, in regard to the gun case, President Biden saying today that his son will be pardoned and will not see any jail time in regards to that. But again, I was struck by the comment, unfair and selective prosecution by his own Justice Department.
And to be fair, how unusual is it? The kind of action that we saw against Hunter Biden, would you agree with what the president is saying about this being unfair, or as Donald Trump has used it when it's applied to himself, a witch hunt?
Well, let me make the case that the attorneys for Hunter Biden made. The case they made is that on the gun charge, which involved false paperwork, filing false paperwork in order to purchase a gun, that those cases are rarely prosecuted absent a significant other major sort of crime, i.e. a crime of violence. That was the case they made. And they made the case in terms of the tax charges that Hunter Biden had paid the money back, that this was selective prosecution because there were other remedies that the Justice Department could have gone to resolve it. So again, that was the argument of Hunter Biden's attorneys. He's put out a statement tonight talking about how he's attempted to get his life back together, that this was all in his mind based on the fact that he was an addict, addicted to cocaine, which caused his life to unravel and for him to make a lot of, difficult and poor choices. The special counsel's office made the case that he lived lavishly on decisions that he made not to pay taxes, and that he knew he should have paid the taxes and therefore should be prosecuted.
And I do want to release a statement that, read out a statement that Hunter Biden just issued a little while ago, where he said, "I have admitted and taken responsibility for my mistakes during the darkest days of my addiction, mistakes that have been exploited to publicly humiliate and shame me and my family for political sport. Despite all this, I have maintained my sobriety for more than 5 years because of my deep faith and the unwavering love and support of my family and friends. In the throes of addiction, I squandered many opportunities and advantages. In recovery, we can be given the opportunity to make amends where possible and rebuild our lives if we never take for granted the mercy that we have been afforded. I will never take the clemency I have been given today for granted, and will devote the life I have rebuilt to helping those who are sick and suffering." And now I want to bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, who joins us on the phone. Dan, we've been talking with John and Pierre. How unusual do you find this to be?
Well, look, it's obviously very unusual because it's an incredibly unusual situation. But let's go through some of what you've been talking about. First of all, the comments by Hunter Biden, talking about the fact that he was in the throes of addiction. It's not particularly relevant as a legal matter, meaning there are a lot of people who are in the throes of addiction who commit crimes, including drug crimes. You can argue that in sentencing it can help them, but when it comes to guilt or innocence, it's really not a particularly significant argument that he was in the throes of addiction. Here is what is significant, and this is the question that you asked Pierre about each of the charges. And there's a separate answer, I think, with regard to the gun charge and the tax cases. When it comes to the gun charge, this is talking about filling out a form to get a weapon. There has never been another case brought in federal court with this set of facts, meaning where there was one gun, the gun was not used in a crime, there were no other crimes that the person was charged with in connection with this, and the person had no criminal record. There's never been a federal case. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't a technical crime committed, but it means that he's got a very good argument that this case felt like selective prosecution. The tax case is a little squishier. Yes, it's true that there are a lot of cases where, when it comes to tax violations, they let someone pay it back or pay a fine, and they don't charge them criminally. But there are also cases where they do charge them criminally, particularly when they live lavishly, et cetera, like this. So That one, I think, is a closer call as to whether the case would have been brought in another situation. And the last point I'll make is that there was another option here for the president, and that is to grant clemency, meaning he's granted pardons here. That means these convictions go away. The other option he could have done is he could have just said, convictions stand, but I'm going to determine that there will be no sentence to be served in effect for this. He didn't do that. He went for an all-out pardon, which, as you pointed out, is a reversal from what he had told David Muir.
Dan Abrams for us. Thanks so much. I want to bring that same question to ABC's chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, we know that President Biden has stayed silent on this issue for months, but when he was asked this specifically before, he said he would not do it. Now he's doing it. Why do you think he's making this statement now?
It is pretty remarkable. Not only is President Biden doing something that he repeatedly, including to our own David Muir, said he simply would not do, that a pardon for his son was off the table, but it strikes me in reading the president's statement here that he is really doing something that we haven't heard from him even, which is commenting on these cases. He tried very carefully to stay away from that because he didn't want to give any kind of impression that he was, tipping the scale in any kind of way, interfering in any kind of way in the justice system. But when you look at the statement that he put out tonight, he is making it clear what he really thinks of all of this, that this has been simply an effort to go after him politically. He says in trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, saying there's no reason to believe it will stop here. He says bluntly, enough is enough. And he says that the truth here, he believes, is that even though he's wrestled with this, he says he believes raw politics has infected this process, and it has led to a miscarriage of justice. A remarkable about-face from President Biden.
ABC's Mary Bruce for us. Thank you so much. And just to recap, President Biden has just announced that he will pardon his son Hunter on gun and tax charges. Be sure to stay with ABC News for continuous updates on abcnews.com and much more on Good Morning America in the morning. Until then, I'm Lindsay Davis in New York. Good day.
When you bring together all the baddest mothers around, well, something's bound to go down. This Ali fight, I'm thinking Black Vegas. They're all going home in a box.
Good to be with you, Natasha.
Niall, I do want to talk to you about this breaking news that is just coming into our newsroom right now. Apparently, an 11th hour bid, President Biden set to issue a pardon for his son, Hunter. What are you learning about this? I understand it's breaking as we speak.
It is breaking as we speak, and we have a statement from President Biden saying that today he signed a pardon for his son, Hunter. He goes on to say that from the day he took office, he said he would not interfere with the Justice Department's decision-making, and he kept his word beyond that point. But then he says that the charges in this case came about only after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election. So, obviously this is going to be hugely controversial. There's no question about that. It is somewhat unexpected in that the White House had previously suggested this would not happen. There were questions certainly about commutation, for example, which I remember the White House pressing back against. Now, this is, as you say, breaking news, like literally within the last couple of minutes, Natasha. Yeah. So, obviously, we'll learn more about this. We will get more reaction to it. But a very, very striking moment from President Biden with about 50 days or so left of his term.
Niall, is this an uncharacteristic and frankly shocking reversal on the part of Biden? Because he has repeatedly said that he would not use his executive authority in this manner to pardon his son or to commute his sentence. How unexpected is this?
It's very unexpected. I don't think anyone really had envisioned this. People had envisioned the theoretical possibility of it. That's why the White House kept being asked about it. But those suggestions, those questions, seemed to be quite firmly rebutted at the time. And indeed, it was a sort of a badge of honor for the White House to note that the president would not interfere in his son's case, would let the investigations run their course. So for him to do an about-face on that in the waning days of his presidency is pretty striking and will obviously cause a lot of criticism.
I think the timeline of this is interesting as well. I mean, it's obviously the first of the month on December 12th. This pardon coming ahead of his sentencing that is set for the 12th. The conviction on federal gun charges involved there. And then separately on December 16th, he was set to be sentenced in a separate criminal case. He pled guilty in September to federal tax evasion charges. And it is interesting, Niall, this pardon is expected to cover both of these things, both the gun charges, the conviction there, and the guilty plea as well. Is that right?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, I'm just scanning the statement as we go, but it would appear that that is the case. And obviously, the fact that there are those two separate cases is in itself significant. I mean, you will remember, Natasha, that at one point there was a plea deal that Hunter Biden had taken that then fell apart, and then it plunged us all back into this storyline, this trajectory. It was obviously a personally painful matter for the president and, of course, for Hunter Biden and for the extended family. But nonetheless, to actually pardon a member of one's own family does seem to call into very obvious question the idea that you're letting the Justice Department and justice system work its own path. I mean, by definition, you're not doing that if you're saying, well, I'm the president and he's my son, so I'm going to let him off with it.
It is fascinating, and this pardoning power would assure that his son doesn't serve any jail time. Very quickly, Niall, you spend such a great time really understanding the psyche and the behind-the-scenes workings of both Obama and then Biden. Tell me a little bit about this moment in time he finds himself in, scrambling to try to put together a legacy after just such a bruising loss for his party. At one point during the DNC, praised for stepping aside right in the right moment, and now just raked over the coals by his own party for not stepping aside soon enough before this stunning loss. He makes this decision this weekend after saying that he wouldn't. He has always had such a vocal, in touchness with his moral compass, and really prides himself on that. Niall, what is happening here?
Well, I don't think it's anything that will be great for his legacy. I mean, I think that people might understand on a human level pardoning a member of one's own family, but I don't think it is a great thing to boast about.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find
We do have some breaking news just into our newsroom. We want to get this into you. We do know that President Biden has officially pardoned his son, Hunter Biden. I do want to show you this tweet that we have from the Associated Press talking about the fact that President Joe Biden has pardoned his son, sparing the younger Biden with a possible prison sentence for federal felony gun and tax convictions, and the reversing of his past promises at this time to not use the extraordinary powers of the presidency for the benefit of his family members. So we do know that this is happening. The Democratic president had previously said he wouldn't pardon his son or commute his sentence after his convictions in the two cases in Delaware and California. Pulling up some video for you as well. Of course, we know that this is going to be a statement that we have now from President Biden as well. He says, "Today I signed a pardon for my son Hunter. From the day I took office, I said I would not interfere with the Justice Department's decision making, and I kept my word even as I have watched my son being selectively and unfairly prosecuted without aggravating factors like use in a crime, multiple purchases, or buying a weapon as a straw purchaser. People are almost never brought to trial on felony charges solely for how they filled out a gun form." I want to show you this tweet as well that does have a piece of the statement there. But he also goes on to say those who were late paying their taxes because of serious addictions but paid them back subsequently with interest and penalties are typically given non-criminal resolutions. It is clear that Hunter was treated differently. The charges in his case came about only after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election. Then a careful negotiated plea deal agreed to by the Department of Justice unraveled in the courtroom, with a number of my political opponents in Congress taking credit for bringing political pressure on the process. Had the plea deal held, it would have been a fair, reasonable resolution of Hunter's cases. I do want to continue on here with the remainder of that statement as well. He says, no reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion than Hunter was singled out only because he is my son, and that is wrong. There has been an effort to break Hunter, who has been 5.5 years sober, even in the face of unrelenting attacks and selective prosecution. In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop here. Enough is enough. For my entire career, I have followed a simple principle. Just tell the American people the truth. They'll be fair-minded. Here is the truth. I believe in the justice system, but as I have wrestled with this, I also believe in raw politics. It has infected this process, and it led to a miscarriage of justice. And once I made this decision this weekend, there was no sense in delaying it further. I hope Americans will understand why a father and a president would come to this decision. Again, that was the full statement coming from the White House. President Joe Biden now agreeing that he will be pardoning his son, Hunter Biden. We did.
On trial, and I know that you cannot speak about an ongoing federal prosecution, but let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know, and I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
He would not. Tonight, President Biden pardoned his son, Hunter.
The younger Biden faced prison time for felony gun and tax evasion convictions. KCON News reporter Lori Perez outside the federal courthouse in downtown LA after speaking to experts who say this is big trouble for Democrats. Lori.
That's right. Hunter Biden was scheduled to be here at the federal courthouse later this month to be sentenced in his tax evasion trial. Now, as his legal troubles appear to be ending, analysts say the political problems for his father and his father's party are just beginning. I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him. That was President Biden shortly after his son Hunter was convicted in a federal gun case and after his youngest son pled guilty to federal tax evasion charges in September. The White House again said there would be no pardon. But now, just weeks before Hunter Biden was set to be sentenced, facing up to 42 years in prison, the president did what he said he would not: pardoning his son, saying in a statement, "No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion than Hunter was singled out only because he is my son." And the president alleges an effort to break his son, who is 5.5 years sober, adding, "In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop here. Enough is enough." Nima Rahmani is a former federal prosecutor.
There's no question that Hunter Biden committed many crimes. He didn't pay his taxes for years. He owned a gun when he was an admitted drug addict. These are crimes that are prosecuted routinely. Now, perhaps addict in possession isn't prosecuted without other crimes, but there's plenty of evidence that Hunter Biden committed other crimes, including not paying his taxes. So there's really no validity to the president's argument.
Beyond the propriety of the pardon, political analysts say President Biden has to answer for why he went back on his word. Jack Pitney is a professor of American politics.
The thing is, he made a very explicit promise, which he broke. And I'm writing a book now about President Bush and Read My Lips. And there is a political price to pay for broken promises. Unfortunately for Joe Biden, this will be in the first paragraph of his obituary.
He says President Biden's troubles from this will not be his alone.
This puts Democrats in a very tough spot. Trump is going to issue some very controversial pardons in January. Democrats were ready to attack him for it. Now the Republicans will come back and say, what about Hunter Biden? This is going to put pressure on Democrats to disagree with, condemn this pardon. And that in turn will create friction with the administration, which still has time to run before Biden leaves office.
Now, the president says he made his decision after spending time with his family, including Hunter, over the holiday weekend. We are live in downtown Los Angeles. I'm Lori Perez. Back to you.
Lori, thank you. President-elect Trump responding on social media, writing, quote, "Does the pardon given by Joe to Hunter include the J6 hostages who have now been imprisoned for years? Such an abuse and miscarriage of justice," end quote.
US President Joe Biden has pardoned his son Hunter, who's been convicted of 2 federal felonies. Hunter Biden was found guilty of making false statements on a gun background check, as well as failing to pay taxes. He could have spent more than 40 years behind bars. The president said his son had been unfairly targeted and that his convictions were a miscarriage of justice. The decision comes just weeks before he's due to leave office. Biden had repeatedly said that Hunter would not be pardoned. Speaking earlier this year, shortly after Hunter Biden's conviction, the U.S. president said he would not challenge the outcome.
With regard to the question regarding the family, I'm extremely proud of my son Hunter. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know, and I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
And Mike Hanna's in Washington, D.C. with more details.
After years of saying that he wouldn't, President Biden has reversed course and given a full and unconditional pardon to his son Hunter. Hunter Biden was facing sentencing later this month in charges on a gun application in Delaware and tax evasion in California. Now these charges will simply go away. In announcing the pardon, President Biden says that Hunter was signaled out, and I quote, "only because he was my son." He says, "In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop. Enough is enough," he continues. So President Biden making very clear his belief that there's a massive political aspect to this case, and certainly throughout the years, Hunter Biden has been a target of Republican enemies of Joe Biden, in particular Donald Trump, who's referred to Hunter Biden on many, many occasions. And President Biden also in the statement says, "I believe in the justice system, but raw politics has influenced the process and it has led to a miscarriage of justice." So strong words from the president and explaining why he has done a U-turn and has now given a full and unconditional pardon to his son.
likely to be massive reaction, particularly from his Republican opponents. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Eric Ham's a political analyst who's joining us now from Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. It's no surprise that an outgoing president would want to issue some pardons. The problem perhaps with this one is the fact that he absolutely said he was not going to do this.
That's right. But again, now that an election is over and Joe Biden has no more races to run, I think what we're seeing now is a father who is steadfastly looking out for his son and believing that his son got a political raw deal. He believes he's actually righting that wrong.
Critics of Democrats have said that they always try to take the moral high ground, particularly when facing off against Republicans. Does this weaken that position that the Democrats might believe that they hold?
Well, that's an interesting take, and I think we will hear more people suggest that about Joe Biden. But clearly what we have seen, at least from the most recent election, is those norms that Democrats try to remain within simply have not worked for them at the ballot box. As we're seeing now, many voters simply do not care. We have to remember, they just recently elected a man who was found guilty on 34 counts of attempting to influence a porn star.
Given what you've just said, and if the norms are now being changed in the United States, are there questions being raised about who else Joe Biden might choose to pardon, and if there are risks around that?
I do believe that will be a lingering question that many people will focus on, and I suspect that now there will be more eyes on any pardons that Joe Biden provides as he heads out the door. But also, I think it raises a much larger question of where does the United States stand now as a nation of laws, given the fact that we are seeing Donald Trump, who was convicted of many crimes, and of course now we see this pardon by Joe Biden of his son. And of course, we see a number of Donald Trump's incoming political appointees who have had their own brush with the law. And I think this is going to, if you talk about the moral high ground, this is something that's going to be very difficult for the U.S. government to use as it tries to hammer other nations in particular like China, Russia, and North Korea.
Yeah, I want to expand on that a little bit because obviously the international implications of this could be significant given the fact that the U.S. has over many years has set itself apart in suggesting that it is working to some sort of rules-based order, for want of a better phrase. How difficult do you think this is going to make it now for the U.S., for successive U.S. governments, essentially, to try to pressure other governments around the world?
I think it blurs the lines, and I think it makes it difficult for the United States to make those arguments, especially when you have Joe Biden, who has just done this when, as you mentioned, he said that he would not. Now, of course, he has an argument to make, and many will perhaps believe that. But again, I think when you look at successive moves being made by Joe Biden and, of course, Donald Trump, who ran on pardoning January 6th insurrectionists, I think the argument for the United States becomes much, much more harder as the nation moves forward when you look at this, particularly now that the laws seem to only work for or don't work for certain people.
It's really interesting to get your thoughts on this. Eric Ham, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Make sure to subscribe.
Should Biden pardon his son, Hunter?
I think I would pardon my child. I don't even have kids. I'd bury a body for my child. We just saw Donald Trump, his indictments go away because he's in power.
One of the issues that I have is when you look at the charges that Hunter Biden was indicted on, less than 0.09% of the population is indicted on that charge. And so it's basically close to zero. So I actually think that the only reason he was indicted is because his last name is Biden.
Right, okay, so we're talking here felony gun charges and tax evasion, Brad. But more importantly, how do you like the election result? Is there justification for this?
It's all comically absurd, but I'll say this, it is true.
that only a tiny amount of people are prosecuted for the crime that Hunter Biden was prosecuted for. But what she failed to mention was that Hunter Biden wrote a memoir confessing to it. He wrote a book where he detailed his extensive drug use at the exact same time that he signed a federal form to purchase a gun attesting that he was not using drugs. So he lied on a federal form to buy a gun, which is a felony gun offense. And the Democrats are the party of big gun control advocacy here in America. So it's a glaring hypocrisy. And yet they're acting like it's no big deal or as if he's a victim because he's Hunter Biden. I will say this, though. Morally, he did the crime. He should do the time. But if I was a lame duck president, maybe I'd pardon my son too, honestly, because you have nothing to lose. You don't have to get reelected. I wouldn't want my son to see the inside of a jail cell. So would it be the right thing to do? No. But would it be kind of understandable on a human level? I honestly have to say I think it would be.
US President Joe Biden has pardoned.
Well, after raising more than 1.5 billion US dollars during her failed election campaign and ending up with $20 million in debt, it seems Kamala Harris is desperate for more cash because the vice president is still reportedly pumping Democrat donors for money weeks after the election loss. Joining us now is journalist, writer and co-founder of the Based Politics podcast, Brad Palumbo. Brad, good to see you. Look, either the Democrats have no idea how to manage money or can't read the room. I suspect both at this point. But how bad of a look is this?
It's pathetic and insulting. I mean, you blew $1 billion, including on celebrity endorsements and building 6-figure podcast sets to be built up for an hour in your